Now to
Absolutely.
President Biden and his foreign policy issues. I know you've written about this, and you've made the argument that after the botched withdrawal from Afghanistan, the president has made an even more significant blunder in respect to China. Can you please explain that?
Well, yes, you see, the Afghan withdrawal of a year ago came back into the headlines really this week, didn't it, with the news of the droning of Ayman al-Zawahiri, the head of al-Qaeda. A year ago, when the botched Afghan withdrawal occurred, you'll remember that President Biden said one of the reasons that it had occurred was because the main objectives of America in Afghanistan had been achieved, i.e. the removal of al-Qaeda from Afghanistan. Whatever you think about that, it is inexplicable if al-Qaeda were not in Afghanistan, that 1 year later, the head of al-Qaeda was in Kabul, only meters away from the British and American embassies in Kabul. So there was a problem right there. Even Biden's victories remind you of American defeats. But the movement this week on the Speaker of the House, Nancy Pelosi's flight to Taiwan really was very interesting, because you can take all sorts of views about this. I happen to think, I'm no fan of Nancy Pelosi's, but I think she was quite right to go to Taiwan. I think it's intolerable that American officials should be told where they can and cannot fly by the Communist Party of China. So I think actually Nancy Pelosi did the right thing in visiting. But the White House has prevaricated over this issue in recent months. It's gone back and forth. And as a result, you know, we really have seen a very dangerous thing. The Communist Party of China, as we saw from its response to Donald Trump, and as we've seen its response to different attitudes in Australia and different governments in Australia's attitudes towards China, we know that the Chinese Communist Party is very aware of when they are dealing with somebody who is strong, who is effectively immovable. And we know what they can do when they recognize that they have a contender who is effectively malleable. And in Joe Biden, the Communist Party of China appears to recognize, particularly on the issue of Taiwan, that they're dealing with essentially a malleable administration in DC. Now, I think for the future of the 21st century, and we've discussed this before, Rita, for the future of the 21st century, that is an exceptionally dangerous position for the world to be in. America, the world's leading democracy, the world's leading economy, cannot be seen to be able to be pushed around. Its decision-making, its policy-making, and indeed its officials' movements cannot be seen to be being pushed around by the communists in Beijing. So I very much hope that the Biden administration recognizes the scale of the Chinese challenge, recognizes the nature of the communist movement there, recognizes that it has to be extremely careful about giving Beijing even perceived victories. And so we'll see what comes from this. There's a lot of communist threats going on against America, and we'll just see whether the Chinese communists have as good a time pushing around the government of America and its officials as they have trying to push around Australian and British officials in recent decades.
You've given us plenty to think about there again, Douglas Murray. Thank you for joining me tonight.
It's a great pleasure as always. Thank you, Rita.